Before we dive into these 3 terrifying winter road trip stories that will make you think twice about traveling during the cold season, make sure to hit that subscribe button and smash the like icon. These stories are based on real experiences shared by people who barely made it out alive. Trust me, you'll want to be subscribed for more content like this. It was December 23rd, 2018, when Marcus Chen and his 3 college friends decided to take a road trip from Denver to Aspen for a skiing vacation. The forecast predicted light snow, nothing they couldn't handle in Marcus's 4-wheel drive SUV. They were young, confident, and excited about their winter break adventure. Little did they know that this trip would become the most horrifying experience of their lives, one that would leave permanent scars on their psyche and change their perception of winter forever. The group consisted of Marcus, who was 22 years old and studying engineering, his girlfriend Sarah, a 21-year-old nursing student, his best friend Tyler, a 23-year-old aspiring photographer, and Tyler's sister Emma, who had just turned 20. They loaded up the SUV with their ski equipment, enough food for 3 days, and set off at 6 in the morning, just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. The roads were clear initially, and the mood in the vehicle was jovial, filled with laughter and anticipation. Marcus drove carefully as they left the outskirts of Denver, his hands steady on the wheel. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, controlling the music and occasionally leaning over to kiss Marcus on the cheek. Tyler was in the back with his expensive camera, taking photos of the landscape as it transformed from urban sprawl to mountain wilderness. Emma had her earbuds in, humming along to her own playlist while scrolling through her phone. Everything felt perfect, exactly how a winter road trip should feel. 2 hours into their journey, the weather began to shift. What started as light flurries quickly intensified into heavy snowfall. The visibility dropped dramatically, and Marcus had to slow down significantly. He turned on the windshield wipers to their highest setting, but they could barely keep up with the accumulating snow. The temperature gauge showed it was dropping fast, now reading 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Tyler, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. He told jokes, made everyone laugh, and assured them that they'd be through the worst of it soon. But as another hour passed, the storm only grew more violent. The wind began to howl, shaking the SUV with powerful gusts that made Marcus grip the steering wheel even tighter. The road became increasingly difficult to see, and several times Marcus felt the tires slip on patches of black ice hidden beneath the fresh snow. Sarah pulled out her phone to check the weather updates, but there was no signal. She tried multiple times, refreshing the screen, but nothing appeared. That's when the first wave of real concern washed over the group. Emma took out her earbuds and leaned forward, her voice carrying a note of worry as she asked if they should turn back. Marcus considered it, but they were already halfway to their destination, and turning around meant driving back through the same dangerous conditions they'd just navigated. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to drop a comment below telling us about your scariest winter driving experience. And if you haven't already, hit that like button to help this video reach more people who love true scary stories. The decision to continue forward would prove to be their first major mistake. Within 30 minutes, the storm escalated to what could only be described as a full blizzard. The snow came down so thick that Marcus could barely see 5 feet ahead of the vehicle. The road signs were completely obscured, and the lane markers had disappeared under several inches of white powder. Marcus reduced their speed to barely 15 miles per hour, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. Then, without warning, the SUV hit a deep patch of ice. The vehicle spun out of control, rotating a full 360 degrees before sliding off the road. They crashed through a wooden guardrail, and for a terrifying moment, the SUV was airborne. Everyone screamed. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm so hard, her nails drew blood. Tyler's camera flew out of his hands and smashed against the window. Emma's screams were the loudest, pure terror in her voice. The SUV landed hard in a snowbank about 20 feet down an embankment. The impact deployed the airbags, filling the cabin with white fabric and the acrid smell of the chemical propellant. For several seconds, no one moved. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the constant howl of the wind outside. Slowly, Marcus pushed his airbag down and looked around. His head was throbbing, and he could taste blood in his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue. Sarah was crying softly, her hands shaking as she checked herself for injuries. Tyler groaned from the back seat, holding his shoulder where the seatbelt had dug in during the impact. Emma was silent, staring straight ahead with wide, shocked eyes. Marcus tried to start the engine, but it made a sickening grinding sound and refused to turn over. He tried 3 more times, pumping the gas pedal, but it was no use. The SUV was dead. Tyler pulled out his phone, his hands trembling as he tried to call for help, but just like Sarah's phone, there was no signal, not even a single bar. They were completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a disabled vehicle during a blizzard, with temperatures continuing to plummet. Marcus made the decision to assess their situation and check the damage to the vehicle. He forced open his door, fighting against the wind that tried to slam it shut. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath away. He could barely keep his eyes open against the driving snow. He made his way around to the front of the SUV and immediately saw the problem. The front axle was completely destroyed, bent at an unnatural angle. Fluid was leaking into the snow, creating dark stains. Even if the engine had started, they wouldn't have been able to drive anywhere. When Marcus climbed back into the vehicle, his face said everything. They were stranded. Sarah started to panic, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Emma was crying now, asking what they were going to do, how they were going to survive. Tyler tried to stay calm, suggesting they wait it out, that someone would come looking for them. But deep down, they all knew the truth. No one was coming, not in this storm. They were on a remote mountain road, and they could be here for hours, maybe even days. The temperature inside the SUV began to drop rapidly without the heater running. Marcus pulled out the emergency supplies he'd stored in the back, blankets and some hand warmers. They huddled together, trying to conserve body heat. The wind rocked the vehicle constantly, and the snow was already beginning to bury them. Tyler suggested they should try to dig out and hike for help, but Marcus shut that idea down immediately. In a whiteout blizzard, they'd be dead within an hour. Their only chance was to stay with the vehicle. As darkness began to fall, their situation became even more dire. The temperature outside had dropped to 5 degrees below zero, and inside the SUV, it wasn't much warmer. They could see their breath in thick clouds. Emma's lips were turning blue despite being wrapped in 2 blankets. Sarah had stopped crying, her face blank with shock and fear. Marcus knew they needed to find shelter soon, or hypothermia would kill them before morning. That's when Tyler spotted something through the snow. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but then he saw it again. A light, flickering in the distance, barely visible through the storm. He pointed it out to the others, and they all strained to see. It was definitely there, a warm orange glow that seemed impossibly inviting in the midst of all that white and cold and darkness. Make sure you're subscribed because the next part of this story gets even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens when they reach that mysterious light in the storm. Marcus made the decision quickly. They couldn't stay in the SUV. They would freeze to death. They had to try for that light wherever it was coming from. It looked like it might be a house or cabin, maybe a mile away, though distances were impossible to judge in the blizzard. They gathered what supplies they could carry, wrapped themselves in every piece of clothing and blanket they had, and prepared to face the storm. The moment they stepped out of the SUV, they knew they'd made a terrible mistake. The wind was so strong, it nearly knocked Emma off her feet. The cold was beyond anything they'd experienced, burning their exposed skin, freezing the moisture in their nostrils. Marcus took the lead, with Sarah holding onto his jacket. Tyler came next, with Emma gripping his belt. They formed a human chain, afraid that if they let go, someone would be lost to the white void forever. Progress was agonizingly slow. Every step was a battle against the wind and the knee-deep snow. They couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Several times, one of them stumbled and nearly pulled the whole group down. Marcus kept his eyes focused on that distant light, using it as their beacon. It seemed to flicker and dance, sometimes appearing closer, sometimes farther away, as if it were alive and teasing them. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Tyler shouted something that the wind carried away. Marcus turned to see Tyler pointing off to their left. There, barely visible, was a shape, a structure. As they altered their course and pushed forward, the shape resolved itself into a cabin. It was larger than they'd expected, 2 stories tall, with dark wooden walls almost completely covered in snow. The light they'd seen was coming from a window on the ground floor. They stumbled up to the front door, and Marcus pounded on it with his fist. His hands were so cold he could barely feel them. No one answered. He pounded again, harder this time, calling out for help. Still nothing. Tyler tried the doorknob, and to their immense relief, it turned. The door was unlocked. They practically fell inside, the wind slamming the door shut behind them with a bang that echoed through the cabin. The interior was warm, almost hot compared to the freezing hell outside. A fire was burning in a large stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The cabin appeared to be well maintained, with rustic furniture, thick rugs on the wooden floors, and oil lanterns providing additional light. But something felt wrong. The table was set for dinner, with 4 plates and silverware neatly arranged, but the food on the plates was untouched and looked several days old. A thin layer of dust covered everything except the area immediately around the fireplace. Marcus called out, asking if anyone was home, but his voice just echoed back. They searched the ground floor quickly, finding a kitchen, a bathroom, and a small study. all empty. There were signs that someone had been living here recently. Fresh logs were stacked by the fireplace, and the pantry was well stocked with canned goods and dried foods. But there were no occupants, no sign of where they might have gone. Sarah found a radio in the study, an old-fashioned CB radio. She tried to get it working, but it only produced static. Tyler discovered a journal on the desk, its pages filled with handwritten entries. The most recent entry was dated December 19th, just 4 days earlier. He began to read it aloud, and with each sentence, the temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the roaring fire. The journal entry described how the writer, a man named David Kowalski, had come to the cabin to finish his novel. He wrote about how peaceful it was, how the isolation was exactly what he needed. But then the tone shifted. He began writing about strange noises at night, footsteps on the roof, scratching at the windows. He described feeling watched, even when he was alone. The final entry was barely legible, the handwriting shaky and desperate. It simply said, "They're not human. They wear the skin, but they're not human. Don't trust your eyes. Don't trust your ears. Don't let them in." Emma's voice was high and panicked as she asked what that meant. Marcus tried to calm her down, suggesting the writer had just been going stir-crazy from the isolation, that cabin fever was a real thing. But Tyler was looking at the journal more closely. He pointed out that some of the entries were written in different handwriting. Not just different, but wrong somehow. The letters were formed correctly, but they lacked the natural flow of human writing. They looked almost mechanical, as if someone or something had been carefully copying human script without understanding it. Before anyone could process this information, they heard it. A sound from upstairs. A creaking, like someone walking slowly across the floor. They all froze, staring at the ceiling. The footsteps moved from one end of the upper floor to the other, then stopped. Silence. Marcus grabbed a fireplace poker, the only weapon-like object within reach. He gestured for the others to stay quiet and started toward the stairs. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story is giving you chills, and drop a comment telling us if you think they should go upstairs or barricade themselves on the ground floor. Tyler grabbed another fireplace tool, a heavy iron shovel, and followed Marcus. Sarah and Emma huddled together near the fireplace, their faces pale with fear. The stairs creaked under Marcus's weight as he climbed slowly, the poker held out in front of him. Tyler was right behind him, his breathing shallow and rapid. When they reached the top, they found a hallway with 3 doors, all closed. Marcus approached the first door and listened. Nothing. He turned the knob slowly and pushed it open. It was a bedroom, neatly made, but empty. They checked the second room, a bathroom, also empty, but something was off. The mirror was fogged up, as if someone had just taken a hot shower, but the room was cold. Tyler reached out and touched the mirror. It was ice cold, but the fog remained, impossibly present. The third door was at the end of the hall. As they approached it, they could hear something. A wet sound, like someone chewing. Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. He looked back at Tyler, who nodded, his face set with grim determination. Marcus threw open the door. The room was dark, except for the moonlight filtering through the window, made eerily bright by the snow outside. In the center of the room stood a figure. It had its back to them, hunched over something on the floor. The chewing sound was louder now, accompanied by the crack of bones. The figure was wearing clothes, a flannel shirt, and jeans. But something about its proportions was wrong. Its arms were too long, its back bent at an angle that shouldn't have been possible for a human spine. Marcus called out, his voice cracking, asking if the person was okay, if they needed help. The figure stopped moving, stopped chewing. For a long, horrible moment, there was absolute silence. Then, slowly, impossibly slowly, the figure began to turn around. That's when they saw its face, and that's when Tyler screamed. It wore a human face, but it was like a mask that didn't quite fit. The skin sagged in places, too loose, and in other places, it was stretched too tight. The eyes were wrong, too large and too far apart, and they reflected the moonlight like an animal's eyes, glowing with an unnatural yellow light. The mouth was stained with something dark, and when it smiled, they could see that it had too many teeth, row after row of sharp, irregular fangs. The thing that had been chewing on the floor took a step toward them, and that's when they saw what it had been eating. It was the remains of an animal, possibly a deer, but it had been torn apart with such violence that it was barely recognizable. Marcus didn't wait to see more. He and Tyler ran, stumbling down the stairs, screaming for Sarah and Emma to get out, to run, to move now. They burst through the front door back into the blizzard, the wind and cold hitting them like a wall. Behind them, they could hear something coming down the stairs, moving with unnatural speed. They ran into the snow, no longer caring about the cold or the storm, only focused on getting away from that cabin and whatever was inside it. Sarah was crying, Emma was screaming, and Marcus's lungs burned with every breath of frigid air. They ran blindly into the white void, no longer able to see more than a few feet in any direction. Tyler lost his footing and fell, and when Emma stopped to help him up, she looked back toward the cabin. Standing in the doorway was not one figure, but four. They all wore human skin like loose clothing, their forms shifting and wrong beneath. And they were smiling, all of them, with those horrible mouths full of too many teeth. The figures didn't chase them immediately. They just stood there, watching, as if they knew the four college students had nowhere to go. They were trapped in a blizzard, miles from help, in the middle of nowhere. The creatures had all the time in the world. Marcus kept pushing forward, dragging Sarah, while Tyler helped Emma. They stumbled through the snow, their bodies already going numb from the cold. It was Emma who saw the second light. This one was different, moving, sweeping back and forth. A flashlight, and voices, human voices, calling out. Through the snow, a group of figures emerged, but these were different. They were wearing proper winter gear, had equipment, a search and rescue team. Marcus collapsed in the snow, overcome with relief and hypothermia. The last thing he saw before passing out was one of the rescuers speaking into a radio, calling for immediate medical evacuation. Marcus woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Denver. He had severe frostbite on his fingers and toes, and the doctors weren't sure if he would lose any digits. Sarah was in the room next to his, recovering from hypothermia. Tyler had a concussion from his fall in the snow, and Emma was being treated for psychological trauma. When Marcus was finally able to speak coherently, he told the authorities about the cabin and the creatures they'd seen. A rescue team was dispatched to investigate. They found the cabin exactly where Marcus described it, but when they entered, they found nothing unusual. No strange figures, no partially eaten deer, No journal with disturbing entries. The cabin belonged to a David Kowalski, who they later learned had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The cabin had been abandoned since then, though there was evidence someone had been staying there recently. The only disturbing find was 4 sets of human-shaped footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin. But these footprints were wrong. They were too long, with too many toe impressions, and they led off into the wilderness, where they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had vanished into thin air. Make sure you're still subscribed, because we have 2 more terrifying winter road trip stories coming up. And the next one involves something following a couple through the darkness of the Alaskan winter. The second story takes us to Alaska in January 2021, during what locals call the polar night, when the sun doesn't rise for months and the landscape exists in a state of perpetual twilight. Jack Morrison, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer from Seattle, and his new wife, Olivia, 29 years old, and a marine biologist, had decided to honeymoon in Alaska. They wanted an adventure, something different from the typical beach resort experience. They rented a truck equipped for winter conditions and planned a 2-week journey through the interior of Alaska, stopping at various locations where Olivia could study cold water ecosystems and Jack could photograph the northern lights and the unique landscape. They were experienced outdoors people. Jack had spent years photographing wildlife in remote locations, and Olivia had done field research in Antarctica. They felt prepared for anything Alaska could throw at them. The first week went beautifully. They saw incredible aurora borealis displays, encountered moose and caribou, and stayed in small towns where the locals welcomed them with warm hospitality. They fell more in love with each other and with the harsh beauty of the Alaskan wilderness. But during their second week, as they were driving along the Dalton Highway toward Coldfoot, things began to change. It started with a feeling. Olivia was the first to mention it, saying she felt like they were being watched. Jack laughed it off initially, pointing out that they were in the middle of nowhere with nothing but snow and ice for miles in every direction. But as the day wore on, he began to feel it too. That uncomfortable sensation of eyes on the back of your neck, the primitive instinct that tells you you're not alone. They were driving through an area where the road cut between 2 mountain ranges. On either side, the peaks rose dark and forbidding against the twilight sky. The road was empty. They hadn't seen another vehicle for hours. The heater was running full blast, and their headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the snow-packed road ahead. That's when they first saw it in their rearview mirror. Another vehicle, distant, but following the same road. Jack was actually relieved to see another car. It made the vast emptiness feel less oppressive, but Olivia noticed something odd. The vehicle behind them was maintaining a perfect distance, never getting closer, never falling behind. For the next hour, as they drove, the vehicle stayed exactly the same distance away. When Jack sped up, it sped up. When he slowed down, it slowed down. Jack suggested pulling over to let the other vehicle pass, thinking maybe it was just someone who wanted to drive faster. He pulled the truck to the side of the road and stopped. They sat there, watching in the mirrors as the lights behind them grew larger. But then, when the vehicle should have passed them, it stopped. It just sat there, maybe 200 yards back, its headlights illuminating the falling snow. Olivia felt her stomach clench with anxiety. Something was very wrong. Jack put the truck in gear and started driving again. The vehicle behind them immediately started moving too, maintaining that same precise distance. They drove for another 30 minutes, and the vehicle never varied its position. It was like they were being herded, guided towards some destination. If you're feeling the tension building, make sure to leave a like on this video and comment about whether you'd keep driving or try to confront whoever was following you. As night deepened, the landscape became even more alien and unsettling. The mountains seemed to close in, and the road twisted through narrow passes where the walls of ice on either side rose 20 feet high. Jack's hands were tight on the steering wheel, and Olivia kept glancing at the mirrors, her face drawn with worry. The vehicle behind them never wavered, never broke its formation. Then, something changed. A second set of headlights appeared ahead of them. Coming toward them, Jack felt a surge of relief, thinking it was just another traveler. But as the vehicle approached, his relief turned to confusion. The oncoming vehicle slowed down as it neared them. Then, impossibly, it turned around and began driving ahead of them, going in the same direction they were going. Now, they had one vehicle in front of them and one behind, both maintaining perfect distances. Jack tried the radio, but all he got was static. Olivia pulled out her satellite phone, one of their safety precautions, but it showed no signal. That shouldn't have been possible. Satellite phones worked everywhere. She tried 3 more times, but the device refused to connect. The truck in front of them began to slow down. Jack had to slow down too, to avoid rear-ending it, and the vehicle behind them slowed as well, maintaining its distance. They were being compressed, sandwiched between 2 unknown vehicles on a remote Alaskan highway in the middle of the polar night. Jack made a decision. He suddenly accelerated, trying to pass the vehicle in front. But as he did, that vehicle sped up too, exactly matching his speed. He tried to fall back, but the vehicle behind closed the gap instantly. Olivia's voice was shaking as she asked what was happening, what they should do. Jack didn't have an answer. They were trapped, being controlled by these 2 vehicles, and they had no idea why or who was doing this. The situation continued for another agonizing hour. Then, without warning, both vehicles turned off their headlights simultaneously, plunging the road into near darkness with only Jack's headlights illuminating the way forward. But Jack could still see them. The vehicles were still there, visible as dark shapes in the gloom. And that's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The vehicles didn't have the right shape. They were too tall, too narrow. They looked more like vehicles from a different era, like something from the 1940s or 50s, with high, rounded roofs and narrow bodies. And he couldn't see anyone inside them. The windows were dark, empty. Olivia screamed. The vehicle in front of them had stopped, completely stopped, right in the middle of the road. Jack slammed on the brakes, and their truck skidded on the ice, coming to a stop just feet from the rear of the vehicle ahead. The vehicle behind them stopped too, its dark mass looming in the rearview mirror. They were boxed in, trapped. For a long moment, nothing happened. They sat there, engine idling, breath fogging the windows despite the heater. Jack's hand moved to the door lock, making sure it was engaged. That's when the doors of the vehicle in front opened. Both the driver's door and the passenger door swung open, but no one got out. The interior of the vehicle was completely dark, and from where Jack and Olivia sat, They couldn't see inside. Then something emerged. It was tall, too tall to fit comfortably in a vehicle. It had to fold itself, contorting in ways that human bodies shouldn't move, to extract itself from the driver's seat. When it stood up fully, it towered over the vehicle, at least 8 feet tall. It was wearing clothes, or something that looked like clothes, a long coat and hat, but the proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, and it moved with a jerky, mechanical motion, like a puppet on strings. A second figure emerged from the passenger side, equally tall and equally wrong. Behind Jack and Olivia's truck, they heard doors opening. More figures were emerging from the vehicle behind them. Jack threw the truck into reverse and stomped on the gas. The truck shot backward, and there was a sickening thud as they collided with the vehicle behind them. But instead of stopping, their truck punched through it. The rear of the vehicle crumpled like cardboard, and Jack kept reversing, his truck smashing completely through the antique vehicle, which collapsed and fell apart like it was made of paper mache. The figures that had been standing by the vehicles didn't react normally. They didn't jump out of the way or cry out. They simply stood there as Jack maneuvered around the wreckage, turning the truck around. Then they began to move toward the truck, walking with that same jerky, unnatural gait. Their faces, glimpsed briefly in the headlights, were pale and featureless, like smooth ovals with slight indentations where eyes and mouths should be. Jack floored the accelerator, and the truck fishtailed before the tires found traction. They raced back the way they'd come, the engine roaring, the speedometer climbing to dangerous speeds for the icy conditions. Olivia was twisted around in her seat, looking back. She reported that the figures were just standing there, watching them go. But the vehicle that had been in front of them, the one they hadn't hit, was turning around. Its headlights came back on, and it began to pursue them. Make sure you're subscribed, because you won't believe how this story ends. And we still have one more terrifying tale to share after this. Jack pushed the truck as fast as he dared. The vehicle behind them was gaining, moving impossibly fast, faster than any normal vehicle should be able to go on an icy road. Olivia was praying, her hands clasped together, tears streaming down her face. Jack's jaw was set, his entire focus on the road ahead, on keeping them moving, keeping them alive. They drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes when they saw salvation. Lights ahead, a lot of lights, a town, Coldfoot, the small settlement they'd been trying to reach. Jack didn't slow down as they entered the town limits, racing down the main street until he reached the first building with people in it, a truck stop and diner. He slammed on the brakes, and they both jumped out of the truck, running for the door. Inside, about a dozen people were scattered at tables, eating late dinners or drinking coffee. They all looked up in surprise as Jack and Olivia burst in, wild-eyed and terrified. Jack gasped out that they were being chased, that something was following them. A large man in a flannel shirt, clearly a local, stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the empty street and the highway beyond. He turned back to Jack and Olivia, his expression skeptical, but not unkind, and told them there was nothing out there. Jack insisted, saying to look further down the road. The man did, shading his eyes against the reflection of the diner's lights. He stood there for a long moment. Then his body language changed. He became very still, very tense. Without turning away from the window, he told everyone in the diner to get away from the windows and move to the back. The casual atmosphere in the diner evaporated instantly. People moved quickly, no questions asked. This told Jack and Olivia that whatever was out there, the locals knew about it and feared it. The large man pulled down metal shutters over the windows, heavy steel that locked in place with a solid clang. He did the same with the door, sealing the diner completely. They sat in the back of the diner for 6 hours. No one spoke much. The locals wouldn't explain what was happening, just kept saying they needed to wait it out. Olivia held Jack's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. They could hear things outside, sounds like footsteps, like something very large, walking slowly around the building. The metal shutters shook occasionally, as if something was testing them, but they held. When dawn finally came, or what passed for dawn during the polar night, a gradual lightening of the darkness, the local man opened a small slot in the shutters and looked out. After a long moment, he declared it was safe. He opened the shutters and the door, and everyone emerged cautiously. The street was empty. There was no sign of any vehicle, no tracks in the snow, nothing. It was as if the entire experience had been a shared hallucination. Jack and Olivia left Coldfoot that day, cutting their honeymoon short. They drove straight to Fairbanks, never stopping, never looking back. When they tried to report what had happened to the authorities, they were met with polite disbelief, but the damage to their truck was real. The rear end was completely destroyed, as if they'd crashed through something. The rental company charged them $15,000 for the damage. Years later, Jack did some research. He discovered that the stretch of highway where they'd been followed had a history. Multiple disappearances over the decades, travelers who were never seen again. And there were stories, old stories from the native people of the area, about beings that lived in the darkness of winter, creatures that imitated humans, but were something else entirely. Beings that drove phantom vehicles and hunted people who ventured into their territory. Jack and Olivia never went back to Alaska. They never spoke publicly about what happened to them. But Jack told me this story personally, and I could see in his eyes that the terror was still there, still fresh, even years later. He said the worst part wasn't the creatures or the phantom vehicles. It was the realization that there are places in this world where humans aren't the dominant species, where we're just prey. And sometimes we wander into territories we have no business being in. Before we get to the final story, which might be the most disturbing of all three, please make sure you've hit that subscribe button and left a like. Your support helps us bring you more true scary stories like these. The third and final story takes place in February 2019 on the Icefields Parkway in the Canadian Rockies. The Morrison family, no relation to Jack Morrison from the previous story, was returning home to Calgary after a week-long ski vacation in Jasper. The family consisted of Robert Morrison, a 42-year-old accountant, his wife Jennifer, 39 years old, and a high school teacher, and their 2 children, Sophie, who was 13, and Nathan, who was 11. The Icefields Parkway is considered one of the most beautiful drives in the world, a 230-kilometer stretch of highway that winds through the heart of the Canadian Rockies, passing glaciers, frozen waterfalls, and pristine mountain lakes. In summer, it's crowded with tourists. In winter, it's largely deserted, and driving it requires experience and caution. Robert had driven this route many times and felt confident in his abilities. They set out at 10 in the morning with clear skies and good road conditions. The forecast was favorable, and they expected to be home by dinner time. Jennifer sat in the passenger seat, working on a crossword puzzle. Sophie was in the back seat, listening to music on her headphones. Nathan had his face pressed to the window, watching the spectacular scenery roll by. Everything was perfect, exactly as it should be on a family road trip. About 2 hours into their journey, they passed through an area where avalanche control work had been done recently. The road was clear, but massive walls of plowed snow rose on either side, creating a tunnel effect. As they emerged from this section, Nathan said something that would later seem prophetic. He said the mountains looked angry today, like they were watching the car. Robert and Jennifer laughed it off as a child's overactive imagination. But Sophie took her headphones off and looked out the window. After a moment, she said Nathan was right. There was something about the way the peaks loomed over the highway, the way the shadows fell, that felt hostile, aggressive. Jennifer told them both to stop being silly, but even she felt a slight unease as she looked at the towering mountains surrounding them. Another hour passed without incident. They stopped at a scenic overlook to stretch their legs and take some photos. The air was brutally cold, maybe 20 below zero with the wind chill, but the view was incredible. Massive glaciers clung to the mountainsides, and frozen waterfalls hung like sculptures of ice. They were the only car at the overlook. In fact, they hadn't seen another vehicle for over an hour. They were completely alone in this vast winter wilderness. As they got back in the car and pulled back onto the highway, Jennifer noticed something odd. There was a town ahead, marked on the GPS. She didn't remember a town being in this location. She mentioned it to Robert, who checked his GPS and frowned. There shouldn't be any towns for another 50 kilometers, but the GPS clearly showed a settlement coming up, labeled simply as Rest Stop. They drove around a curve, and there it was, a small town, maybe 20 buildings, nestled in a valley between mountains. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lights glowed in windows despite it being midday. There were vehicles parked on the streets, old-fashioned vehicles like from the 1950s, covered in snow but clearly there, clearly real. Robert felt confused. He'd driven this route dozens of times and had never seen this town before. Jennifer suggested they stop and ask for directions, make sure they were still on the right route. Robert agreed, though something about the town made him uncomfortable. It looked too perfect, too much like a postcard or a movie set. As they drove down the main street, they didn't see anyone walking around, but the curtains in the windows moved, as if people were watching them from inside the buildings. They pulled up in front of what appeared to be a general store, the kind of place that might sell supplies and snacks. Robert told the family to stay in the car while he went inside to ask for information. He walked up to the door, his boots crunching on the packed snow. When he tried the handle, the door opened easily. A bell chimed as he entered, that classic tinkling sound of an old-fashioned shop bell. The interior of the store was dimly lit and smelled of old wood and something else, something sweet and rotten underneath. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with goods, but the products looked ancient. Cans with labels from decades ago, bottles of soda in designs that hadn't been used since the 60s. A radio on the counter played big band music, crackling and distorted. But there was no one behind the counter. No one in the store at all. Robert called out, asking if anyone was there. His voice echoed strangely in the confined space. He walked down one of the aisles, looking at the bizarre collection of outdated products. That's when he noticed the calendar on the wall. It showed February 1953, 66 years ago. He told himself it was just decoration, someone's idea of vintage charm, but his instincts were screaming at him to leave. He heard a sound from the back of the store, a door opening. Footsteps. Robert turned and saw a figure emerge from a back room. It was a man, or appeared to be a man, wearing clothes from the 1950s, a cardigan sweater and slacks. But his face was wrong. It was too smooth, too perfect, like a wax figure. And his smile was too wide, stretching his face in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The figure spoke, welcoming Robert to their town in a voice that sounded wrong, too high-pitched and too flat, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. It asked if Robert needed anything, if his family needed anything. Robert backed toward the door, stammering that they were fine. They were just passing through. The figure's smile grew impossibly wider, and it said that no one just passes through. Everyone who comes to their town stays forever. If this story is creeping you out, smash that like button and drop a comment telling us if you'd stay in the town or run for your life. Robert didn't respond. He just ran. He burst through the door and sprinted to the car, shouting for them to go, to leave now. Jennifer didn't ask questions. She could see the terror on her husband's face. Robert threw the car into gear and accelerated hard, the tires spinning on the ice before finding traction. As they sped down the main street, doors began to open. Figures emerged from the buildings, dozens of them, all wearing clothes from different eras, all with those same smooth, wrong faces and too wide smiles. The figures didn't chase them. They just stood there, lining the street, watching as the Morrison family's car raced toward the edge of town. But as Robert drove, he realized something horrible. The road only went one way, into town. There was no exit on the other end. The street simply ended at the base of a mountain, a sheer wall of rock and ice. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just feet from the wall. He threw the car into reverse and turned around, intending to drive back the way they'd come. But the street behind them was now blocked. The figures had moved, forming a solid line across the road, standing shoulder to shoulder. Robert had no choice. He drove straight at them, hoping they would move, hoping this was all some nightmare he could just push through. The figures didn't move. Robert closed his eyes and braced for impact. But there was no impact. The car passed through the figures like they weren't there. For a brief, horrible moment, Robert saw one of the figures' faces pressed against the windshield from the inside, looking in at them, its mouth open in that impossible smile. Then they were through, back on the highway, the town disappearing behind them. Robert didn't slow down. He drove at dangerous speeds, his hands locked on the wheel, his face pale with shock. Jennifer was crying silently. Sophie and Nathan were both screaming, traumatized by what they'd seen. They drove for another hour before Jennifer noticed something that made her scream. In the rearview mirror, following them on the highway, was a line of vehicles, old-fashioned cars and trucks, dozens of them, maintaining a steady pace behind them. Robert pushed the car faster, but the vehicles behind them matched his speed. They drove through the afternoon, and the line of pursuing vehicles never fell behind, never got closer. As evening approached and the light began to fail, Robert saw something ahead that gave him hope. A truck stop, a real one, modern and well lit, with several semi-trucks parked in the lot. He pulled in, and the entire family ran inside. The truck stop was busy with drivers and travelers, real people going about their business. Robert told the woman behind the counter that they were being followed. She looked out the window at the empty highway and told him there was nothing there. Robert insisted, describing the line of old vehicles. The woman's expression changed. She became serious and told them to follow her. She led them to a back office and made a phone call. Within 20 minutes, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer arrived. He listened to their story with a grave expression. When Robert finished, the officer sighed and told them they weren't the first. Every year, a few people report encountering a ghost town on the Icefields Parkway. Different locations, different times of year, but always the same story. A town that shouldn't exist, populated by things that look human but aren't. The officer explained that the region had a history. Long before it became a highway, it was a route used by indigenous peoples who spoke of spirits in the mountains, beings that could create illusions, trap travelers in places that existed between this world and another. Modern people didn't believe in such things, of course, but the reports kept coming. People who encountered the ghost town, people who saw the phantom vehicles. Most made it out. Some didn't. Their cars would be found abandoned. No sign of the occupants. No tracks in the snow showing where they'd gone. The officer escorted the Morrison family back to Calgary, driving behind them the entire way. He said it was for their peace of mind, but Robert noticed how carefully the officer watched the road, how his hand never strayed far from his radio. They made it home safely, but the experience changed them. Nathan developed severe anxiety and had to see a therapist for years. Sophie became withdrawn and refused to talk about what happened. Jennifer and Robert's marriage became strained, the shared trauma driving a wedge between them that they never fully overcame. Robert did his own research afterward. He found dozens of reports going back over a century of strange encounters on that stretch of highway and the older routes that preceded it. Ghost towns that appeared and disappeared. Vehicles that shouldn't exist. Figures that weren't human. The indigenous peoples of the area had known about these things for thousands of years. They had names for the entities, warnings about traveling alone in winter, rituals to protect travelers. But modern people had dismissed these as superstitions until they encountered the phenomena themselves. The most disturbing thing Robert discovered was a pattern. The encounters increased during certain times of year, particularly during the darkest, coldest parts of winter, and people who encountered the ghost town often reported feeling drawn to return, as if something was calling them back. Robert felt it himself, a pull, an urge to drive that highway again, to see if the town was still there. He never gave in to that urge, but it never fully went away. It was there in his mind, a constant whisper, inviting him back to that place between worlds. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on because we post new scary stories regularly. and you won't want to miss them. Drop a like on this video if these stories gave you chills, and leave a comment telling us about any strange winter experiences you've had. These 3 stories share common themes: isolation, the vulnerability of humans in extreme environments, the realization that there are things in this world we don't understand, things that exist in the spaces between our reality and something else. Winter roads, with their emptiness and harsh conditions, seem to be particularly prone to these encounters. Maybe it's because winter strips away the comfortable veneer of civilization, leaving us exposed and vulnerable. Maybe it's because the cold and darkness create conditions where these other things, these beings, can more easily manifest. Whatever the truth is, these stories serve as a reminder. When you're traveling in winter, especially in remote areas, be careful, stay alert, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore the warnings, the feelings of being watched, the sense that you've entered a place you shouldn't be. And if you encounter something inexplicable, something that doesn't fit with your understanding of reality, don't try to rationalize it. Just get away. Get to safety. Get to other people. The winter roads are beautiful, majestic, awe-inspiring, but they're also dangerous, not just from the weather and the driving conditions, but from things we can't explain, things that wait in the cold and the dark for unwary travelers. These 3 groups of people survived their encounters, but they were changed by them, marked by the experience of coming face to face with the unknown. So the next time you're planning a winter road trip, remember these stories. Pack extra supplies, tell people where you're going, stay on main roads when possible, and if you see something strange, a town that shouldn't be there, vehicles that don't belong, figures that don't look quite human, drive away as fast as you can. Don't stop. Don't investigate. Just drive. Because sometimes the only way to survive an encounter with the unknown is to refuse to engage with it at all. Thank you for watching these 3 terrifying true winter road trip stories. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, hit that like button, and share it with your friends who love scary stories. Leave a comment below telling us about your own creepy experiences on winter roads. We read every comment and love hearing your stories. Stay safe out there, especially during winter travels, and remember, not everything that looks human actually is human.